It started with a secret. In March 1942, an American codebreaker named Commander Joseph Rochefort broke the Japanese Navy's secret code. When he read the intercepted messages, he discovered something shocking. Japan was planning a massive invasion of an island called AF. Everyone in Washington said he was wrong. But Rochefort wasn't going to accept that, so he devised a brilliant ruse. He told Midway Island to broadcast a radio message saying their freshwater distillation system was broken. Hours later, Japanese radio traffic reported that AF had a water shortage problem. Rochefort was right. And now, America had one chance, just one, to set an ambush that would change everything. This is the story of how intelligence won a war. This is the story of the men who cracked the impossible code. Darkness before dawn. Pearl Harbor and the weight of failure. December 7, 1941. The morning that shattered America's peace. 353 Japanese aircraft descended on Pearl Harbor in 2 devastating waves. Within 2 hours, the results were catastrophic. 8 battleships lay sunk or damaged. The USS Arizona exploded with such force that over 1,100 men died in seconds, entombed forever in their ship. As American sailors struggled to survive in burning waters, Commander Joseph Rochefort was in his basement office at Pearl Harbor. In that moment, a question burned in his mind, one that would haunt him for months. Why didn't he see this coming? Rochefort had spent years training to read the enemy's signals. He was both an expert Japanese linguist and a trained cryptanalyst. By early 1941, he'd hand-picked many of the Navy's best codebreakers for his unit at Pearl Harbor Station HYPO, H4 Hawaii. But on December 7th, the Japanese striking force had emitted no signals. Rochefort couldn't track ships that refused to communicate. Yet the guilt consumed him. In the weeks after Pearl Harbor, Rochefort felt personally responsible. He and his team would spend the next 6 months working toward redemption, working toward a chance to change the course of the war. The birth of a code-breaking team. To understand Rochefort's struggle, we must understand the man himself. Born in 1900 in Dayton, Ohio, Joseph Rochefort joined the Navy while still in high school. He showed an unusual talent. A friend noticed his ability to solve crossword puzzles with remarkable speed, and recommended him for cryptanalysis training. In Washington, he trained under the legendary codebreaker Agnes Meyer Driscoll, herself a master of breaking enemy codes. From 1929 to 1932, the Navy sent Rochefort to Japan to study the Japanese language, immersing himself in culture and communication methods that would prove invaluable years later. By early 1941, Rochefort arrived at Pearl Harbor to take command of Station HYPO. He had a mission: break the Japanese Navy's most sophisticated cipher system, known as JN-25. While Navy cryptographers in Washington and the Philippines worked on other Japanese codes, Rochefort's team would focus on the main fleet cipher, the code that would reveal Japanese naval operations. Rochefort hand-picked his team carefully. He brought in Lieutenant Commander Thomas H. Dyer, a brilliant young officer who would become known as the father of machine cryptanalysis for his innovative use of IBM tabulators to process the thousands of possible code combinations. He recruited Joseph Finnegan, an experienced linguist. He brought in Alva B. Laswell, a master translator who would later say he was directly responsible for our knowing ahead of time of that attack. But on December 7, 1941, none of these brilliant minds saw Pearl Harbor coming. The Japanese had maintained strict radio silence. There were no messages to intercept, no codes to break. In the days following the attack, Station HYPO was in chaos. Rochefort's team picked through the wreckage, both physical and psychological. They had failed their nation, but they were determined to never fail again. Breaking JN-25. The JN-25 cipher system was one of the most sophisticated codes the world had ever seen. Unlike simple substitution ciphers, JN-25 used a 5-digit code system. Each number group represented words or concepts. But here was the problem. The Japanese used a superencipherment system. The code groups were encrypted again before transmission, creating a cipher within a cipher, a seemingly impossible puzzle to solve. In the weeks after Pearl Harbor, Rochefort's team began their assault on this fortress of secrecy. They worked 12-hour shifts in a dank basement, often stretching far longer. They had no computers. They had no calculators. They had punch cards, notebooks, pencils, and brilliant minds. Thomas Dyer led the technical breakthrough, using IBM punch card tabulators, machines, originally designed for census work. He developed procedures that allowed cryptanalysts to sort through thousands of possible solutions systematically. Each time the team broke a new code group, they added it to their growing library. Each addition brought them closer to understanding the entire system. By the spring of 1942, after months of relentless work, Rochefort's team began to read enough of the JN-25 traffic to provide useful intelligence. They started seeing patterns. They started reading Japanese operational plans, and what they read alarmed them. The warning signs. Beginning in April 1942, messages began intercepted by American listening stations revealed something extraordinary. The Imperial Japanese Navy was preparing a massive operation. Not a small raid, not a probe. A major offensive involving multiple carrier divisions, battleships, cruisers, and invasion forces. The messages mentioned an operation scheduled for early June 1942. They included references to ships, troop movements, and supply operations. But there was one crucial piece of information missing: the target. In the encrypted traffic, the destination was referred to only as AIF. Some American intelligence officers speculated AFM might mean Samoa. It might be Hawaii. Perhaps another attack on Pearl Harbor. It might even be the west coast of the United States. The calculations were simple, but terrifying. Japan still had 10 fleet carriers to America's 3. In Washington, the Office of Naval Intelligence dismissed Rochefort's conclusions. They insisted the operation was directed at the Aleutian Islands in Alaska or Port Moresby in New Guinea. They had arguments, they had political weight, and they were confident. But Rochefort and his team had something else: the truth. Rochefort was certain about one thing. AF referred to Midway Island, a tiny atoll in the Central Pacific, measuring just over 2 miles across. Midway sat at a crucial strategic position 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. If Japan captured Midway, they would threaten Hawaii itself. More importantly, capturing Midway would force the American carriers into a decisive battle. And Admiral Yamamoto, the brilliant Japanese naval strategist, desperately needed to destroy those carriers while Japan still held numerical superiority. Rochefort told Admiral Nimitz his assessment. But Nimitz needed more than brilliant analysis. He needed proof. And that's when one of the most remarkable deceptions in military history was born. The water trick. One of Station HYPO's officers was Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes. Holmes knew that Midway's garrison depended on a critical facility, a freshwater distillation plant that converted seawater into drinking water. The base had limited storage. It was a vulnerability. Holmes came to Rochefort with a brilliant idea. What if they faked a crisis at Midway? What if they had the base broadcast in plain language with no encryption? A message saying their distillation plant was broken. They could claim an explosion had damaged the equipment. They could say the garrison only had 2 weeks of fresh water remaining. Rochefort took the idea to Edwin Layton, Admiral Nimitz's intelligence officer, and one of Rochefort's closest allies since their shared time studying Japanese in Tokyo years earlier. Layton understood the brilliance of the deception immediately. He brought it to Nimitz. The Admiral approved. On May 22, 1942, the garrison commander at Midway received a submarine cable with orders to immediately broadcast an emergency message. In plain language, on open radio frequencies, they announced their water emergency. American listening stations throughout the Pacific monitored Japanese radio frequencies constantly. Within hours, they picked up exactly what they were looking for. Japanese radio traffic from Tokyo, in their encrypted code, contained messages about AF. The messages discussed the need to load additional water distillation equipment. The messages revealed that AF had a serious water shortage. Rochefort had done it. He had confirmed beyond any doubt that AF meant Midway. But more importantly, the Japanese messages revealed something else, something that would prove crucial in the days ahead. They revealed the assault was scheduled to come before mid-June. A prediction against all odds. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King Nimitz's superior remained unconvinced. King and Rochefort had a complicated relationship. King thought Rochefort was too unconventional, too informal in his manner. King preferred officers who wore their uniforms crisply and followed protocols strictly. Rochefort often wore a bathrobe and slippers in his basement office. He sometimes went days without bathing, while absorbed in his code-breaking work. But Rochefort had something King needed. He had the evidence. During May 1942, Rochefort's team performed an almost superhuman feat. They decrypted, translated, reviewed, analyzed, and reported as many as 140 messages per day. In the final week before Admiral Nimitz had to make his crucial decision, the team was processing between 500 and 1,000 decrypts per day. Each message was a piece of the puzzle. Each piece brought them closer to the complete picture. One of the most critical breakthroughs came from Joseph Finnegan. The date-time information in Japanese naval messages was super-enciphered, encrypted even more than the rest of the message. This was supposed to be unbreakable, but Finnegan discovered the method the Japanese had used to encrypt these date-time groups. On May 26, 1942, the team intercepted a message containing orders for Japanese destroyer groups that were escorting invasion transports. When they applied Finnegan's breakthrough, they could read the date-time information. The message confirmed what Rochefort had been saying all along. The operation was scheduled for either June 4 or 5, 1942. By the end of May, Rochefort's team had provided Admiral Nimitz with an astonishingly accurate picture of the entire Japanese operation. They knew the target was Midway Island. The main assault force would come from the northwest. 4 Japanese fleet carriers would lead the attack. The invasion force would approach from a different direction. The operation would begin around June 4, 1942. Nimitz took this intelligence and made a decision that would determine the course of the Pacific War. He would position his 3 remaining carriers northeast of Midway, on the flank of the approaching Japanese force. With intelligence on his side, with knowledge of enemy intentions, he had a chance. Just a chance. But a chance was all America needed. The battle. June 3, 1942. American reconnaissance aircraft spot the Japanese invasion fleet approaching Midway. The prediction was right. The date was right. Admiral Yamamoto's operation was unfolding exactly as Rochefort's team had predicted. Commander Nagomo Kiechi, the same officer who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier, was commanding the 1st Carrier Striking Force. Under his command were 4 of Japan's most powerful fleet carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hairu. These were the best carrier pilots in the world. These were the ships that had dominated the Pacific since December 1941. Nagomo had 7 scouting aircraft available to search for the American fleet. The Americans had over 30 reconnaissance aircraft. Nagomo believed he retained the element of surprise. He believed the American carriers were far away, perhaps still at Pearl Harbor undergoing repairs. He was wrong. Admiral Chester Nimitz had positioned Task Force 16, under the command of Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, northeast of Midway. Task Force 17, under the damaged carrier USS Yorktown, was in the vicinity as well. 3 carriers against 4. 3 carriers that Yamamoto didn't even know were there. On the morning of June 4th, Nagumo launched his aircraft against Midway Island. The Japanese planes descended on the atoll and struck with devastating force for 15 minutes. But the damage done was lighter than expected. The American garrison on Midway, though hurt, was not destroyed. Nagumo's pilots radioed back that another airstrike would be necessary to neutralize the island's defenses. Nagumo made a decision. He ordered his reserve aircraft rearmed with bombs for a second strike on Midway. But then, at 7:28 a.m., a scout aircraft reported shocking news. American surface ships were nearby. Perhaps American carriers were in the area. Nagumo halted the rearming process. Now he had a dilemma. His pilots from the first strike on Midway were returning and needed to land immediately. They were running low on fuel. If he didn't recover his aircraft, they would crash into the sea. But if he did recover them first, the American carriers, if they existed, would find his ships with their flight decks filled with his own returning aircraft, vulnerable, unprepared, unable to launch an attack. This was exactly the trap Rochefort's intelligence had predicted, and Nagumo was walking directly into it. The 5 minutes that changed history. American aircraft from the USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown were bearing down on Nagumo's force. For over an hour, American torpedo bombers pressed their attacks. They were brave, they were desperate. They took terrible losses nearly. All the pilots in some squadrons were killed or wounded. But they succeeded in one crucial thing. They kept Nagumo's combat air patrol tied down. His fighters were forced to stay low, to defend against the torpedo bombers. His flight decks were still filled with aircraft preparing for strikes. He still could not launch his counterattack. Then, at approximately 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers from the Enterprise found the Akagi. Other Enterprise bombers found the Kaga, and bombers from the Yorktown found the What followed was chaos. The Akagi, Nagumo's flagship, was hit by a bomb that pierced her flight deck and ignited a massive fire in the hangar below. The fires spread uncontrollably. Within hours, Nagumo had to abandon his flagship. The Kaga was struck by multiple bombs. Fires erupted throughout the ship. She was consumed by flames and eventually sank beneath the waves. The Soryu was hit by a bomb that exploded on her flight deck. The fire spread within minutes. The order was given to abandon ship. She sank later that day. In a matter of minutes, in what historians call the 5 minutes that changed the Pacific War, America had destroyed 3 of Japan's most powerful carriers. Later that day, the Hiryu was also damaged and sank. 4 Japanese fleet carriers destroyed in a single day. Hundreds of Japan's most experienced pilots lost. Japan's numerical superiority in the Pacific was shattered in 5 minutes. Admiral Yamamoto's calculation had been simple. Japan needed to destroy America's carriers before American industry could build new ones. He failed. On June 4, 1942, it was Japan's carriers that were destroyed. The victory was won not by firepower or courage alone, though both played their roles. The victory was won by intelligence. The victory was won by men in a basement at Pearl Harbor who had cracked an impossible code. The victory was won by Rochefort's team. Victory and betrayal. The news of the American victory at Midway spread across America like wildfire. The press celebrated. The public rejoiced. After 6 months of defeats since Pearl Harbor, America had won a decisive naval victory. But something remarkable happened in the weeks following the battle. The officers in Washington who had doubted Rochefort's analysis began to spread a different story. They suggested that they themselves had foreseen the Japanese plans. They suggested that the code breaking had been accomplished in Washington, not in Hawaii. Admiral Ernest King, Rochefort's superior, was persuaded by OP-20G, the Navy's Washington cryptanalytic station, to distance himself from Rochefort. The relationship between Rochefort and his superiors deteriorated rapidly. In August 1942, just 2 months after his greatest triumph, Joseph Rochefort received orders. He was being recalled to Washington on a pretext, and then reassigned. His new posting was the command of a floating dry dock, a barge used to repair damaged ships stationed in San Francisco. Rochefort was removed from code-breaking forever. The man who had changed the course of the war was effectively exiled from the work that defined him. When Admiral Nimitz recommended Rochefort for the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, the highest honor a rear admiral can recommend, the recommendation was rejected by King. King considered Rochefort one of the most unmilitary-looking officers he had ever encountered. Rochefort never protested. He told Nimitz to stop the recommendation, saying it would only make trouble. He accepted his exile with quiet dignity. But the history books would take decades to correct this injustice. Redemption and legacy. Rochefort was given a Legion of Merit at the end of World War II, but this was seen by many as inadequate recognition. The man who provided the single most valuable intelligence contribution of the entire Pacific War was denied the full honors he deserved. For over 40 years, Rochefort lived in relative obscurity. He retired from the Navy after the war and worked in the commercial sector. Few people knew his name. Few understood his contribution to victory. Then, in 1986, long after the war had ended and many of the political battles had cooled, Joseph Rochefort was posthumously awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. His name was finally, officially recognized for his contribution to victory. In 2000, the National Security Agency inducted Rochefort into its Cryptologic Hall of Fame. On January 6, 2012, the Captain Joseph J. Rochefort Building was dedicated at the NSA facility within Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii. The codebreaker who had worked in a basement at Pearl Harbor, the officer who had changed the course of the Pacific War, had finally received his place in history. The story of Joseph Rochefort is the story of how intelligence won a war. It's the story of brilliant men working in terrible conditions, driven by duty and determination. It's the story of one man's redemption after Pearl Harbor's devastation. But it's also a story about something larger. It's about the nature of intelligence itself. In a world of ships and guns and aircraft, sometimes the most powerful weapon is knowledge. Sometimes the most crucial battle is won not on the ocean, but in a basement filled with papers and calculations. The men of Station HYPO understood this. They understood that intelligence was not about luck or guessing. It was about rigorous analysis, brilliant deduction, and uncommon ability to see patterns that others missed. Joseph Rochefort once said that he could take a message that was only half there and mentally fill in the blanks to the extent of getting the sense out of it. This ability, combined with his team's technical expertise and their sheer determination, changed history. On June 4, 1942, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers sank beneath the waves of the Pacific Ocean. The war would continue for 3 more years, but the outcome was determined that day. America's industrial might and innovative thinking had overcome Japan's initial advantages. And it began in a basement at Pearl Harbor, with men who could read the enemy's secrets. This is the story of the code that changed everything. This is the story of Joseph Rochefort and the men who broke the impossible code and won the war through intelligence.